I walked into the kitchen that Sunday afternoon, expecting the quiet hum of our usual routine. The smell of toast and brewed coffee should have been comforting, familiar. But Mum was already there, a wide grin plastered across her face. She didn't wait for small talk or casual greetings. Instead, she leaned against the counter and said, "I need a favor, sweetie, a big one." My brow furrowed. "A favor?" I asked cautiously, setting down my bag and wiping my hands on a dish towel. She leaned in, her eyes sparkling with excitement, as if I'd just been handed the role of the hero in some grand story. "I want to take a cruise with your siblings next month," she began, "and I need you to help me out financially. $5,000 by next Friday." I froze mid-step, staring at her like she'd suddenly started speaking in a foreign language. $5,000, not 10, not 2, 5. And the way she said it, it wasn't a question, it was an expectation. "Because you've always been the responsible one," she added almost offhandedly. I laughed nervously, hoping the sound would mask my shock. Surely this was a joke, but she wasn't laughing, she was deadly serious. My stomach sank as I realized that this wasn't a one-off request. Years of silent payments covering things no one else seemed to notice. I had been the family's invisible bank for as long as I could remember. Twist S2 crept into my awareness. This was the pattern, repeated, unspoken, expected. I tried to maintain composure, the years of conditioning kicking in. "Why me?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Mum tilted her head, eyes narrowing slightly. "Because you're the only one who never says no," she replied, the guilt in her tone as sharp as any accusation. Heat rose in my chest, a mixture of frustration and disbelief. I forced a nod, muttered that I'd think about it, and left the kitchen, my fists clenched at my sides. Every step felt heavy, my jaw tight, my thoughts spinning in silent protest. The calm Sunday I'd imagined had evaporated. The tension wrapped around me like a heavy blanket, pressing down, suffocating, and for the first time in years I noticed it. The creeping anger I had carefully hidden behind polite smiles. Later, alone in my room, I sank into the worn armchair by the window and let my mind drift backward. Flashbacks unfurled like old photographs, each image a reminder of every time I'd silently shouldered everyone else's burdens. Weddings, car repairs, student loans, every request met with my quiet compliance while my own needs were postponed or ignored. I remembered the time my brother borrowed money for rent and never repaid it. Mum's casual dismissal, "He's going through a phase." I remembered cancelling my own trip to cover my sister's emergency expenses. Each time my maturity had been praised, each act of compliance reinforcing the role I'd been cast in. But now, Twist S4 hit me in full force. I wasn't helping, I was being used. The realization sank in like a stone in my chest, cold and heavy. My hands shook slightly as I reached for my phone, fingers hovering over the screen as I drafted a message. "I can't give you $5,000. I'm not your bank." I typed it, deleted it, retyped, erased again. Each version softened the words, added excuses, tried to smooth over the impending storm, but none of it felt honest. Finally, I hit send, no apology, no justification, just the truth, concise and unwavering. I froze, staring at the screen as my heartbeat thundered in my ears, my palms sweaty. The room felt unnaturally quiet, every tick of the clock loud and intrusive. The tension was unbearable. I had crossed a line, broken a cycle, but the unknown consequences loomed large. Mum's reply came seconds later, and the buzz of my phone jolted me. I didn't touch it, I just sat there, frozen, trying to steady my breathing, knowing that the next message would either shatter the fragile peace or confirm everything I had feared about my family dynamics. I hadn't expected a reply so soon. My phone buzzed in my hand like a warning bell, and when I saw Mum's name on the screen, my stomach knotted. The text that followed felt like a punch I didn't see coming. "If you don't want to help, don't bother showing up for the cruise dinner. Everyone else knows who really cares in this family." The words weren't angry, not overtly, but the way they were crafted, the guilt hidden beneath casual phrasing, the emotional leverage, cut deeper than any shouting could have. I read and reread the message, each time feeling the sting more sharply. Mum had always operated like this: silence rewarded, boundaries punished, and now I realized I had been conditioned to comply, to avoid conflict at my own expense. Twist S7 settled into my mind. She had already told my siblings I would pay. No asking, no discussion, just an assumption that my compliance was guaranteed. I opened the family group chat, a place usually quiet unless someone had news or an emergency. Tonight it was alive with excitement. My siblings were chatting about dinner reservations, thanking Mum for making the cruise happen. One message caught my eye and froze my breath. "Marisol always comes through. Glad you talked to her early." Twist S8 slammed into me. They had been planning, counting on me, operating as if my money was already theirs. I felt my throat tighten, the shock of betrayal burning in my chest. It wasn't just Mom, it was all of them. My compliance had been assumed, my voice irrelevant. For years I had been the quiet enabler, and now I realized the full weight of it. I grabbed my phone and dialed Leah, my coworker and closest confidant, hoping to hear a voice that wouldn't judge, wouldn't manipulate. Her calm, steady presence on the other end allowed me to spill the tension I hadn't even admitted to myself. "You taught them that silence means yes," Leah said after I finished recounting everything. "Now you're teaching them what no sounds like." I admitted my fear. "What if they cut me off completely?" Leah's answer was firm yet liberating. "Then they weren't your family. They were just people you paid to keep peace." Her words resonated. For the first time, I saw that boundaries didn't have to be an act of rebellion. They were a declaration of self-respect. She suggested documenting everything, from texts to past payments, not for revenge but for clarity, to establish a record that I existed outside their assumptions. By the time the sun dipped behind the hills of Bakersfield, I was in my apartment, cooking dinner for one. The sizzle of vegetables in the pan was oddly soothing, grounding me in the reality of my own life. As I ate, I reflected on birthdays I had funded but never celebrated, trips I had cancelled to cover emergencies, holidays I had made perfect for everyone else while my own needs were sidelined. After dinner, I opened my laptop and began compiling receipts and old messages, carefully cataloguing every instance of financial and emotional expectation placed on me. It wasn't for retaliation, it was for awareness. For the first time, I felt the shift in power. Not aggression, not vindictiveness, just a quiet, deliberate clarity. I opened my journal and wrote, "From this day forward, I will never fund my own erasure again." Each word settled into me like a promise. My hands rested on the keyboard, still, steady, calm, deliberate, not of surrender, but awakening. As I closed the laptop, the ringtone cut through the quiet. "Mom." My thumb hovered above the screen, my breath caught. The sound seemed louder than usual, more invasive, more demanding. I froze, hands suspended, knowing that picking up would bring the storm to my door. The phone rang just as I was about to lock my laptop. A sudden intrusion into the quiet I had carved out for myself. Seeing Mum's name made my chest tighten. I braced for anger, for the storm I knew her voice could summon. But instead, she spoke with a disarming calm. "You embarrassed me, Marisol," she said, her tone almost casual. "Everyone thought you were reliable." I blinked, caught off guard. Reliable. That word had been both my badge and my chain. Then came the justification, wrapped in a lie. She claimed she had told my siblings I had agreed to the cruise contribution, just to keep the peace. The guilt trip was immediate, practiced. "I knew you'd come through, you always do, eventually," she added, as if my willingness to endure had been a certainty, not a choice. Twist S10 hit me like a cold wind. She genuinely believed manipulation was a form of family management. Her voice, so steady, masked the control she'd always exerted. Before I could respond, the call ended with a warning disguised as concern. If you don't show up for dinner, they'll know something's wrong, and you'll be the reason this family breaks apart. My hand lingered on the phone, shaking slightly. The weight of the words pressed down, but beneath the initial shock, a quiet resolve began to form. Sleep evaded me that night. I lay in the dark, the phone screen off, my thoughts illuminated only by memory. I remembered a Thanksgiving from years ago, lying in bed with 102-degree fever, yet helping Mom in the kitchen because you're the eldest girl, you help. The pattern was crystal clear now. Every act of compliance had been absorbed into her narrative, never for recognition, only for control. Twist S11 revealed itself fully. I hadn't been protecting the family with my silence. I had been protecting Mum's story about how perfect her children were. Morning brought a pale sunlight over Bakersfield, but my perspective had shifted. I met Leah for coffee, needing someone to witness the mental unraveling I couldn't contain alone. As I recounted the call, her eyes were steady, kind but sharp. "You didn't just say no to money," she said, stirring her cup. "You said no to a lifetime of being the scapegoat." Her words settled over me like a balm I didn't know I needed. Leah shared her own story, her voice heavy with recognition of familiar patterns. How her brother had shifted blame for decades, leaving her to carry burdens silently. We spoke of emotional labor, the invisible currency daughters like us were trained to pay. I felt a tear slip, not of defeat, but of understanding. "I've been auditioning for a role I never asked for," I admitted, my voice low. It was clarity, not complaint. Determined, I returned home and began preparations, not for appeasement, but for confrontation. I drafted a letter to center myself, words not meant for anyone else. "You don't get to name me generous only when it suits you." I chose an outfit I hadn't worn in years, a symbol of the self I had nearly forgotten amid endless caretaking. I printed a list of every contribution I had made, not as a weapon, but as proof against the inevitability of being dismissed as dramatic. Standing in front of the mirror, I repeated quietly, "You're not their wallet, you're not their silence." Each repetition grounded me, each breath reinforced the boundary I was finally willing to claim. Emotional momentum surged, not fury, but clarity. I could face them now, not as someone who would bend to every expectation, but as someone who recognized her own worth and limits. Just as I zipped my bag and prepared to leave for the dinner, a knock sounded at the door, sharp and uncertain. Peering through the peephole, I saw my sister looking anxious, her hands hiding something behind her back. My heart thudded, a mix of anticipation and wariness. She had come to talk, but the object she held promised to shift everything I thought I knew about the night ahead. I parked outside the family estate, taking a moment to breathe before stepping out of the car. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving a soft amber glow over the manicured lawns. I reminded myself to keep my shoulders squared and my gaze steady. Every step toward that door would test the resolve I had spent the last 24 hours cultivating. Inside, the familiar opulence of polished wood and crystal chandeliers greeted me, but it felt hollow, masking the tension that simmered beneath the surface. My mother and siblings were already gathered, speaking in casual tones, yet I could sense the subtle judgments tucked between their words. My stomach tightened, recalling past conversations, veiled manipulations, and countless moments when silence had been my armor. I spotted the envelope Leah had left subtly on the table, almost invisible but strategically placed. My heart skipped. That small slip of paper hinted at secrets, meant to tip the balance, and I braced myself to maintain composure despite the emotional triggers it promised. Moving through the room, I noticed how seats were assigned almost symbolically, head of the table, center stage, versus the distant edges. I chose my place deliberately, aware of the subtle power plays unfolding before my eyes. My mother's polite remarks cut sharper than she intended, each carefully measured to assert control, and I listened, silent but fully present. Then came the first spark, a sarcastic comment from one sibling, implying I had always relied on family money. Heat rose in my chest, but I forced it down, letting my defiance build quietly beneath calm observation. Dinner began with my mother invoking family support and responsibilities. Her words casual yet loaded. My mind traced the history of financial disputes and carefully orchestrated expectations. Every phrase she spoke felt like a test. I ran through mental strategies, rehearsing responses and mapping how to expose discrepancies without losing my composure. The tension built, every glance from a sibling and every clipped comment from Mom feeding the anticipation of confrontation. Subtle power plays emerged. Questions about past contributions, gentle jabs about prior decisions, all designed to provoke a reaction. I answered with calm precision, reframing discussions to assert my agency without overt aggression. Each fact I presented, each carefully chosen word, carved a space of autonomy amidst the expectation of compliance. The room shifted subtly, the air charged with unspoken challenge. Pride and restraint wove together. I could feel the energy of self-control rippling through me as my family attempted to unsettle my poise. Then I opened Leah's envelope. The documents inside revealed misrepresentations in family accounts, subtle lies that had skewed perceptions for years. Shock washed over me, quickly replaced by resolve. I understood the scope of manipulation. The narrative had been crafted to keep me in the shadows, while others shone. The quiet rage that had been simmering now solidified into strategic clarity. I would not react impulsively, but neither would I remain invisible any longer. I rehearsed my opening statements silently, organizing evidence and observations to present without breaking control. Each line fortified my position, a mixture of clarity and calm, revealing past manipulations while asserting my boundaries. My mind moved through scenarios, anticipating responses, ready to pivot without losing the upper hand. The anticipation thrummed through me, every second sharpening my focus, every glance from a sibling a reminder of the delicate balance of this confrontation. Just as I opened my mouth to speak, the front door creaked, and a longtime family friend stepped in. Their presence was unexpected, and in their hands was a folder that could validate my claims. My pulse quickened, the room shifted, tension crackling in the air. The friend's arrival promised to tip the balance, but in whose favor? My eyes met theirs briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between us, and I knew that the next few moments would define the boundaries of my voice and my power within this family. The clinking of silverware and the low hum of polite conversation surrounded me as I settled back into my chair. The envelope from Leah's earlier reveal, resting lightly on the table before me. I kept my hands folded, outwardly calm, yet inside my mind raced through every glance, every half smile, every slight shift in posture among my siblings. Each subtle expression seemed loaded with history, favoritism that had been quietly cultivated, manipulations that had gone unchallenged for years. I catalogued them silently, noting who might escalate tension or betray further under pressure, feeling frustration simmer beneath a carefully constructed exterior. The room smelled of roasted chicken and faint lemon polish, and for a moment I reminded myself to breathe, letting the sensory details ground me while my mind mapped the intricate web of family dynamics. Mum began speaking, her voice smooth, referencing responsibilities, and offering a faintly pointed critique of my independence. I measured my response, weighing each word carefully, determined to assert boundaries without provoking overt conflict. Then came the first sting, a sarcastic quip from her that suggested my contributions had always been minimal. I recognized the familiar pattern, a power play wrapped in civility, and forced a steadying breath. My mind traced the best moment to interject, maintaining control while keeping my frustration concealed. The rhythm of the evening shifted subtly, every statement a test of composure and strategic patience. My siblings joined the game, each offering micro-conflicts disguised as casual conversation, comments about past choices, hints at financial reliance, veiled jabs meant to unsettle me. They all passed across the table like smoke signals, but I read them with precision. I catalogued inconsistencies, recalled moments of past injustice, and prepared to use the envelope's contents to my advantage. The tension rose as I balanced outward politeness with inner calculation, observing reactions, anticipating challenges, and plotting careful counterpoints. Every pause in conversation gave me time to review the facts, every smile or glance a clue to potential vulnerabilities in their narrative. I mentally rehearsed my responses, noting precisely how to present rebuttals without triggering unnecessary drama. I practiced phrasing that revealed the truth without inviting confrontation, calculated the tone to ensure clarity, and predicted likely reactions. The quiet power I felt building within me was not explosive, but deliberate, a measured assertion of agency that would demand recognition without chaos. This moment, I realized, was as much about controlling my own composure as it was about confronting family dynamics. The first tangible victory arrived subtly. I calmly corrected a sibling's misstatement regarding my past financial contributions, presenting facts with a steady voice. The room paused, an almost imperceptible shift acknowledging my assertion, and I felt a quiet swell of pride. I had demonstrated control, intelligence, and poise without sacrificing dignity. A small but significant assertion that set the tone for what was to come. My confidence grew, each word measured and deliberate, each glance exchanged reinforcing the strength I projected. Still, vigilance was necessary. My mother's subtle signals and exchange looks with my siblings reminded me that this quiet victory might provoke retaliation. I evaluated the room, the unspoken alliances and potential responses, preparing mentally to maintain composure no matter the outcome. Every movement, every gesture around the table demanded attention, each subtle threat noted and catalogued, sharpening my awareness while fueling my resolve. Just as the dinner seemed to settle into a rhythm, a new tension surfaced. My father, his voice smooth yet edged with authority, commented on family obligations, carrying the weight of implied expectation. The words felt like a carefully aimed arrow, signaling a potential financial ultimatum hidden beneath the polite veneer of conversation. I felt the room shift imperceptibly, the air thickening with anticipation. My mind raced, weighing options, anticipating reactions, ready to navigate the next move carefully. The game was far from over, and I knew that my next choice, how I responded, what I revealed, and when, would define the boundaries of my voice and influence in this family once and for all. The office smelled faintly of polished wood and old leather as I stepped inside, clutching the envelope I had brought from the dining room. My mother's eyes flicked up from her papers, sharp and expectant, and I immediately felt the tension coil tighter in my chest. She launched into subtle criticisms of my financial decisions, her voice light but edged with condescension. The siblings nearby exchanged knowing glances, their whispered comments like arrows I couldn't ignore. I sat there, acutely aware of patterns that had repeated over decades. Manipulation disguised as guidance, obligation disguised as love. My frustration mounted, a quiet, simmering fire that demanded action. Past strategies of compliance and restraint had left me vulnerable, and for the first time, I felt the need to escalate. I opened the envelope carefully, scanning the documents inside, and my stomach turned. Twist S16 hit hard. An altered financial record suggested that my contributions over the years had been redirected to a sibling without acknowledgement. The betrayal hit in layers: shock, disbelief, then a strategic outrage that sharpened my focus. I pulled out a notebook, began documenting discrepancies, making mental notes of potential allies or witnesses within the family who could corroborate the patterns I'd quietly endured. Each entry solidified my resolve. I wasn't reacting out of spite, but planning an informed response. Careful calculation guided my next steps. I rehearsed the confrontation in my mind, envisioning the precise points I would raise, the timing of each, and how I would phrase them to maintain composure while maximizing impact. I mapped the room, noting who might react defensively, who might be swayed, who might attempt to manipulate the discussion further. This was about clarity, not theatrics, about exposing truths without surrendering control. I felt a cautious empowerment, my nerves balanced by strategic intent, and I reminded myself to stay anchored in facts and not emotions alone. When the moment arrived, I spoke quietly but firmly, pointing out discrepancies I had documented, letting the evidence speak. Twist S17 unfolded subtly. A minor but revealing detail caught my mother and sibling off guard, hinting at my ability to uncover what had been hidden from view. The room shifted imperceptibly. The undercurrents of control began to ripple against the firm boundary I had established. I felt a measure of satisfaction, tempered by apprehension, knowing this revelation would resonate beyond the immediate conversation. My calm, deliberate words carved out a new space for authority, my own authority, within the family dynamics. Their reactions were immediate and defensive. Some attempted to deflect blame, others narrowed their eyes, whispering beneath polite smiles. I maintained composure, observing, reflecting, letting their defensive maneuvers unfold, while internally reinforcing my own strength. Each counter-statement I had anticipated played out as expected, and I felt the subtle thrill of maintaining control while the others scrambled to justify actions long taken for granted. My internal dialogue reinforced patience, strategic calculation, and measured persistence, tempering controlled fury with self-discipline. Late into the evening, I stepped into the backyard for a brief reprieve, the cool air brushing against my face, grounding me. Flashbacks of previous instances when my efforts had been overlooked or co-opted surfaced: birthdays, family gatherings, contributions never acknowledged. They reinforced why I had chosen to confront rather than comply silently. I considered long-term consequences, planning future moves, mapping out contingencies, and determining how best to maintain leverage without losing integrity. The night stretched quietly, yet tension lingered like a charged wire between us, each step forward deliberate and mindful. Just as I returned indoors, my father's voice called from the study. A casual remark about a family decision that suggested another financial expectation or hidden agenda. The words hung in the air, heavier than intended, a subtle signal that this confrontation was only the beginning. I realized then the breadth of the challenge ahead. Every decision from this point could tip the balance in ways that mattered far beyond a single argument. I clenched my fists for a moment, feeling a steady determination replace anxiety. The breaking point had arrived, and I was fully aware that every subsequent move mattered. Every word, every gesture, every silent pause was a strategic choice in a game I could no longer afford to lose. I sat at my desk, the envelope from the family dinner still open before me, evidence spread across the surface like breadcrumbs, leading to the truth I had long suspected. The night outside was quiet, the hum of streetlights faint through my window, but inside my mind raced, methodically assessing every piece of information, every glance, every whisper from earlier. I went through each family member's likely motivations, weighing their weaknesses, predicting reactions and imagining the paths they might take when confronted. Every pattern, every prior manipulation clicked into place. My objective was clear: regain control of my boundaries, financial and personal, and reclaim the respect that had been quietly eroded over the years. A note slipped between the papers hinted at a deeper twist, something that could fundamentally shift the family dynamics, and I knew I had to act with precision. I began my subtle maneuvers carefully, speaking during casual conversations with carefully measured remarks, testing reactions without revealing my full hand. My frustration simmered beneath a layer of strategic calm, each word deliberate, each tone designed to probe for weakness. I watched closely as expressions flickered, smiles tightened, and micro-gestures betrayed concealed discomfort. Every response was documented, mentally and physically, a catalogue to draw upon when the moment to act decisively arrived. I could feel the pulse of anticipation, restrained fury building as I planned each move like a chess player several turns ahead, knowing that patience and timing were my allies. Allies became apparent in unexpected corners. Siblings and relatives who had remained on the sidelines showed subtle signs of agreement when I shared anecdotes or framed my points in terms of shared experience. Carefully, I nurtured these small commitments, understanding that influence could be wielded without overt confrontation. Empathy, I realized, could be as potent as confrontation, and I began to feel a cautious optimism that I could rally support for what I intended to assert without creating unnecessary explosions. These small alliances, barely noticeable to others, offered a network of quiet validation I could leverage if needed. The encounter with my mother was the most delicate part. I confronted her with a mixture of clarity and controlled calm, using facts, past observations, and minor but revealing details to unsettle her just enough to test her reaction. Each revelation was a scalpel, precise and measured. I felt anger beneath the surface, but let it remain contained, a controlled energy that fueled my strategic intent. Her eyes flicked toward the documents I held, a flicker of uncertainty betraying her otherwise composed facade. In that moment, I understood the subtlety of power, how timing and restraint could accomplish far more than loud declarations ever could. Ethical considerations weighed on me as I reviewed my plans. I debated internally how far to push, where to draw the line, and what boundaries I would not cross. Each decision balanced tactical advantage with moral responsibility. I ran mental simulations of possible reactions, counter-reactions, and unintended consequences. I wanted to win, yes, but not at the expense of becoming the very manipulator I had been resisting. Every scenario was scrutinized, rehearsed, and refined to maintain my integrity while advancing my objectives. Preparatory moves continued well into the early hours. Documents were organized, notes aligned, and potential points for public accountability discreetly noted. Every action was deliberate, every gesture intentional. I could feel the weight of the coming confrontation, the necessity to maintain composure, while ensuring the next stage of the conflict would favor my position. The anticipation was electrifying, a blend of determination and restrained aggression, tempered by the understanding that control was about discipline, not impulsive action. Then, as I sorted the last of the papers, I noticed a folded note tucked away in the drawer I hadn't opened. Curiosity and caution mingled in my chest as I unfolded it. The message hinted at a manipulation far more intricate than I had anticipated, a new layer of strategy that suggested the family's next move could be devastating if unanticipated. I felt a twinge of adrenaline, recognizing that the game had evolved beyond my initial calculations. My pulse quickened, a mix of anticipation and steely resolve. The note confirmed what I had suspected all along. Nothing was as simple as it seemed, and every step forward had to be deliberate, measured, and flawless. The stage was set for the next maneuver, and I was ready. The living room felt smaller than I remembered, the chandeliers casting sharp reflections across polished surfaces that once felt welcoming but now seemed like a stage set for judgment. I spread the documents, letters, and financial records across the coffee table, double-checking every detail. Each piece was a thread leading to the web of manipulation I had been navigating for years. My mind replayed the family dynamics, anticipating their likely reactions, noting who would falter under truth and who might double down on deception. I rehearsed what I would say, the tone, the pauses, the calm certainty I needed to project. This confrontation wasn't about anger, it was about clarity, control, and reclaiming the narrative that had been twisted behind my back. I felt a pulse of anticipation, every nerve alert, knowing that the smallest misstep could undermine everything I had carefully prepared. When I entered the room, the subtle tension was immediate. Eyes flicked to me, some curious, others cautious, all aware something was about to change. I addressed the family in measured tones, stating my refusal to fund any demands that had been unjustly placed upon me. The room shifted. A hidden letter, tucked into the corner of a file, surfaced as I laid out facts about redirected contributions and secret arrangements. My siblings' eyes widened. My mother's carefully constructed composure faltered for a fraction of a second. The twist I had been anticipating revealed itself in full. The manipulation and misrepresentation, once hidden, could no longer be ignored. Shock and disbelief rippled through the group, the weight of undeniable evidence settling heavily. As I methodically presented each example, I maintained my moral high ground, letting facts speak louder than my voice. I corrected misconceptions without malice, exposing patterns of unfairness that had long been tolerated. I highlighted my contributions that had previously been credited elsewhere, my work, my sacrifices, now illuminated in their proper context. The pace quickened as murmurs rose. Questions emerged and family members scrambled to reconcile their disbelief with the truth I presented. The room felt electrified, tense yet subdued, every reaction feeding the strategic momentum I had built. My restraint became a silent weapon. The calmness in my voice contrasted sharply with the chaos of their responses. Emotions shifted as the confrontation continued. Anger flickered on faces. Defensive postures hardened, yet beneath it, a begrudging recognition began to form. I felt satisfaction, a triumph tempered by the knowledge of long-term consequences. This was not vengeance, it was justice, articulated with precision, earned through careful observation, documentation, and strategic planning. I could sense the respect, tentative and cautious, filtering into their awareness. The lessons I delivered were clear, boundaries established firmly, but relationships were preserved where possible, tempered by the understanding that trust had been fractured and would need time to heal. By the end of the evening, autonomy had been asserted. The documents, discussions, and revelations ensured that I would no longer be silently exploited. I acknowledged the subtle undercurrents of tension that would linger, yet I felt empowered in the clarity I had established. I recognized that victory was not absolute. There were still unseen moves to consider, still shadows of influence to guard against, but I had stepped fully into my authority, demonstrating intelligence, composure, and unshakable resolve. I left the living room knowing that I had reclaimed not only respect, but the narrative of my own life. As I collected the documents and prepared to leave, my gaze fell on a folded note, tucked neatly atop the piano. A chill ran down my spine. The handwriting was familiar, deliberate. I knew without opening it that the family's game was far from over. The storm I had weathered had cleared the air, but a new challenge awaited, subtle yet unmistakably strategic. Every preparation, every calculated move I had made would be tested again, and I was ready. The morning light filtered softly through the blinds, painting stripes across my kitchen table as I sipped my coffee and sifted through the remnants of last night's confrontation. The house was quiet, filled only with the hum of the refrigerator and the distant chatter from the street below. I reflected on every argument, every calculated move, every carefully documented fact that had brought the family to a moment of undeniable clarity. It was strange to feel both exhaustion and relief at the same time, knowing that the storm had passed but its echoes would linger. I allowed myself a small, private smile, acknowledging the strength it had taken to face years of manipulation without surrendering my composure. For the first time in a long while, I felt the subtle weight of autonomy, a quiet pride in having reclaimed control over my life and my narrative. I reached for my phone and sent a measured message to the siblings, willing to acknowledge boundaries. The words were precise, respectful yet firm. Clarity without accusation. Conversations followed over the next few hours, each one reinforcing the principle that my decisions, my resources, and my time were my own. There were nods of understanding, hesitant agreements, and even apologies whispered over lines of text. Not everyone was ready to change, and some resistance lingered, but I felt an unshakable sense of inner authority. My values had been communicated, my limits delineated, and I no longer felt responsible for performing the invisible labor of appeasing others. For the first time, I understood that respect had to be mutual, not assumed, and that my silence was never a bargaining chip. It was a personal choice. Later, I wandered to my favorite cafe, the one with the worn wooden tables and the smell of freshly ground beans that always seemed to center me. I treated myself to a quiet breakfast, surrounded by strangers who didn't carry the weight of family expectations. I journaled about my accomplishments, small and large, recording victories that had once been overshadowed or credited to others. I allowed myself to savor professional achievements, financial independence, and personal resilience, recognizing that these were the markers of self-reliance rather than validation from anyone else. The evidence I had wielded as a tool during confrontations was now a testament to lessons learned, not weapons for ongoing conflict. I smiled as I reflected on the journey from compliance to clarity, from passive acquiescence to deliberate choice. In the quiet of my home that afternoon, I performed small rituals that felt symbolic of release, organizing the remaining documents, setting aside old letters, and marking completed tasks that had long carried hidden burdens. Each action felt like shedding a layer of expectation I had carried for decades. I explored hobbies, tending to plants and sketching in a notebook, each movement reinforcing that my life was mine to shape. I reached out to friends who had supported me quietly, sharing stories without seeking validation but enjoying connection. Healing was not instantaneous, nor was it absolute, but it was present in the small, deliberate acts of reclaiming my time, my space, and my peace. Even as I moved forward, a quiet awareness lingered of potential future conflicts. There would always be echoes of the past, faint reminders of the manipulations I had unraveled. Yet for the first time, I felt equipped to respond with intelligence, measured strength, and calm resolve. I understood that the past would not define me, but the lessons it offered would forever guide my choices. Life continued, uncertain but navigable, and I felt a deep, sustaining satisfaction in knowing that I had emerged not only intact, but empowered. The family story was not rewritten in their eyes, but in mine. It was complete, dignified, and wholly my own.